So, good afternoon, sir. My lesson is lesson 7.3, which is the development of taxonomy. So, what is taxonomy? It is a science of classifying and naming organisms. Taxonomy classified organisms based on their relatedness, which is why phylogenetic trees are relevant in this field. At the same time, evolutionary relationship of organisms are also being considered to provide a more comprehensive understanding of the overall connection of one organism to another. In general, the field of taxonomy can be divided into three major functions. These are identification, naming, and classification. So, identification, this is the process of recognizing and describing an organisms. Kung like makakita ta og new species, ato siya susihan kung pareho ba siya sa existing organism or if something entirely new. Kay scientists compare physical features, genetic makeup, and even behaviors to determine its identity. For naming, once an organism is identified, it is given a scientific name and name using binomial nomenclature. It is a two-name system. Example, humans are called Homo sapiens, where Homo is the genus and sapiens is the species. So this systems helps avoid confusion because organisms have one universal name regardless of language or location. And lastly, the classification. Organisms are grouped into hierarchical system from the broadest category, which is the domain kingdom, down to the most specific or species. Example, dogs belong to kingdom of Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, and so on until their specific species. So, in summary, the taxonomy is more than just naming organism. It is just a structured system that help us understand their relationships and evolution. This field is important in biology, ecology, and even conservation kay pinaagi biya sa taxonomy mas makasabot ta sa biodiversity of kung giunsa pag-evolve ang kinabuhi sa kalibutan. Identification and description. Taxonomy deals with the identification of organisms. To this, modern-day taxonomists provide comprehensive taxonomic description of all documented species on Earth. The taxonomic description can be based on morphology, behavior, and genetic data. Sometimes this can be accompanied by a taxonomic line drawing of the species that show how it looks like. This description can be used by other people so to properly identify the species they encountered or collected in the field. So, introduction to a biochemistry. This picture is a sample of taxonomic drawing describing a plant species as shown. For plants, taxonomic publication usually include the plant habit. The plant habit drawing is an illustration of the plant's form, appearance, and morphology. So, naming, taxonomy also deals with the naming of species. This is particularly important for newly discovered species that require their own scientific names. The subfield of taxonomy that deals with the proper naming of organism refers to nomenclature. Nomenclature is a set of rules that are followed in properly naming organisms. So, taxonomy is not just about identifying and classifying organism. It is also deals with naming them. This is very important, especially for newly discovered species because each organism needs a unique and standardized name to avoid confusion. So, unsa day ay ang nomenclature? Nomenclature daw is a subfield of taxonomy that focuses on naming organism is called nomenclature. Kini nga system bitaw kay nagamit og set of rules aron masigurado nga ang tanang species adunay klaro og standardized nga pangalan. Scientists follow specific guidelines to make sure that each species has only one official scientific name. So ngano da importante ang nomenclature? It is because to avoid confusion. If different people give different names to the same organisms, it will be difficult to study and communicate about it. Example, ang usa ka fish sa laing-laing lugar, lahi-lahi ang common name pero pinaagi sa scientific name, klaro kung unsa gyud siya nga species. So, classification. Taxonomy deals with the proper groupings of organisms based on their morphological, genetic, and evolutionary relatedness. This is usually done by studying the phylogeny of organisms. The process of classifying organisms is a highly organized manner refers to systematics. However, you must take note that systematic is a broader science compared to taxonomy. It normally involves a much wider scope compared to taxonomy. So, ang taxonomy is responsible for grouping organisms properly based on their morphology, which is ang itsura or forma, and then genetics, which is ang DNA o genes, and evolutionary relationship is ang kasaysayan sa ilahang usaban. So, by doing this, scientists can understand how species are related and how they evolve over time. So, how are organisms classified? Scientists use the phylogeny, which is the study of evolutionary history of organisms. Gamit ang phylogenetic trees, makita kung unsa kaduol o kalayo ang relasyon sa mga species. For example, humans and chimpanzees share a closer ancestor compared to humans and fish. So, unsa ang systematics? Systematic is the process of classifying organisms in an organized way. However, systematic is broader than taxonomy because it does not just focus on classification but also on studying evolutionary relationship and diversity. So, ang difference between the taxonomy and systematics is ang taxonomy is ga-focus on naming and classifying sa mga organisms. And then, ang systematics, mo siya ang wider field that includes taxonomy, pero also looks at evolutionary history and relationship between species. So, in summary, taxonomy helps organize life into proper groups, while systematic provides a deeper understanding of how organisms are connected through evolution. In that picture, the figure shows the difference between the taxonomy and systematics. While taxonomy concerns itself with naming, identification, and classification, systematic take this a step further by attempting to determine evolutionary relationship between organisms. So, history of taxonomy. The taxonomy is an old field of science. It can be as old as the early languages used by mankind. Taxonomy has been an essential field that allowed early human civilizations to identify edible and poisonous plants and animals. In this section, you will learn the general history of the development of taxonomy as a science it is known today. So, the earliest taxonomies, one of the early written taxonomic accounts was written by Shennong, an emperor from ancient China. He is considered the father of Chinese medicine, who documented and identified hundreds of medical herbs. In his work, it can be translated as Divine Husbandman's Materia Medica. Emperor Nong documented a total of 365 medicine from identified plants and animals. So, sa history of taxonomy, siya, mao daw ni ang pinaka-maas nga field of science. And as the earliest languages used by humans. So, sa karaang panahon, wala pa scientific methods. Pero ang mga tao, naka-classified na og mga tanom og mga animals based sa ilang gamit. Kung kini edible ba, like makaon, o poisonous, like makahilo. So, this help early civilization nga makasurvive and develop knowledge about nature. Sa earliest taxonomies is ang pinakauna nga record taxonomic work was by a ancient Chinese named Shennong. He is a emperor and considered the father of Chinese medicine because he documented and identified hundreds of medical herbs. And then, nganong importante man siya. Shennong works shows that taxonomy was already being practiced even before modern science. His classification of medicinal plants was an early form of organizing species, which later influenced the development of taxonomy as a scientific field. So, in this picture, it is the medicinal plants serve as the main focus of the earliest form of the taxonomy. Greek and Roman taxonomies. Aristotle is considered as one of the formally trained taxonomists. He was able to classify several species of vertebrates and invertebrates, which he categorized as organisms with blood and without blood, respectively. Moreover, he classified animals according to the manner of giving birth. Animals with blood into living bearing and egg bearing. With this, Aristotle introduced the Dichotomous concept of taxonomy that classify organisms by type through binomial definition. The binomial definition means that organisms can be described based on two names, namely genus and species epithet. So Aristotle's idea of classification states that organism must be named according to a family where each member can be differentiated from one another using some unique characteristics. For example, he defined humans as a he defined human as due to their ability to think and decide on things. So in this picture, it is the Aristotle's early classification system. So Aristotle summarized all of his works in early taxonomy in the history of animals, in Latin Historia and Animalium, where he classified organisms based on their similarities. He thinks that organisms can be categorized in hierarchical manner. He further described this as the ladder of nature, which is the scala naturae, where life forms can be ranked into an organized system. Theophrastus was one of the students of Aristotle and Plato. Theophrastus wrote early works on the classification of all known plants in his work, the Historia Plantarum. In this book, he described 48 species of plants that he grouped according to growth form. This book was used for taxonomic purposes during the Middle Ages in Europe. And then the Dioscorides is a well-known Greek physician who documented Roman and Greek medicinal plants. He summarized all of his work in a book, De Materia Medica, which describes around 600 species. In this book, he tried to classify plants based on their medicinal properties. This book was used in medicine until the 16th century. Lastly, Flavius, more famously known as Pliny the Elder, was a Roman army commander who wrote many books about giving Latin names to plants. In his only surviving work, Naturalis Historia, that contains 160 volumes, he described plants and then provided them with Latin names. Until today, several of these names are still recognized. So in this picture, this is Theophrastus in 370 to 285 BC. Next is Dioscorides 40 to 90 AD. And then in this picture, he is Flavius 23 to 79 AD. So in the 16th century, these four people here. First is this is the 16th century taxonomist. First is the Caesalpino. Caesalpino is an Italian scientist who is considered as the first taxonomist. He wrote De Plantis, a book containing 1,500 species of plants that were classified based on the growth habit, fruit, and seed form. And then Baldwin Brothers were Swiss taxonomists who wrote Finax Retri Botanici. In 1623, this work tries to list a total of 6,000 species of organisms. The Baldwin brothers cleared that the issue of synonyms and naming organisms, which was a great issue in taxonomy at the same time, there was some species that are known to have several different names according to different books. Their work tried to fix this issue by recognizing the concept of general species as major taxonomic levels. And then third in the picture is John Ray. He was an English naturalist who wrote several important books about taxonomy. He established the concept of species is the ultimate unit of taxonomy. He published a book, Methodius Pletrum Novo, where he tried to identify a total of 18,000 plant species based on relatively narrow species concept. Lastly, Joseph Phaeton de Tournefort. He was a French naturalist who constructed a botanical classification that was dominantly followed in plant taxonomy until the time of Carl Linnaeus. He published Institutiones Reherbae, which contains around 9,000 species from a total of 698 genera. He tried to emphasize the classification of plants based on genera. So here in this picture is Carolus Linnaeus. He was a Swedish taxonomist who started the modern botanical and zoological taxonomy. His contribution to the field has earned him the moniker Father of Taxonomy. He wrote the Species Palanterum that was published until 1758. This contains the baseline of the rules for botanical nomenclature. Also, Linnaeus published Systema Naturae in 1758 that contains information for zoological nomenclature. This book tried to document thousands of plants and animal species and provided the foundation for modern-day botanical and zoological taxonomic standards in terms of naming organisms. So that will be all. Thank you, sir.